Today I'll share with you guys how I brought my own wedding to a screeching halt when I read my vows. My fiancé and I met in a group setting through coworkers. One of our friends was a man named David. He was my best friend, so it was really nice that he got along with the girl I started dating and eventually proposed to. He quickly agreed to be my best man at the wedding. When my fiancé found out, she was really happy and said it would be perfect. I suspected her bit, but not enough to ask about it. She was friends with him too, after all. Well, fast forward to the week before our wedding. My soon-to-be bride was really excited and had been on her phone a lot. I assumed it was all wedding-related planning because she'd be on her phone and stop me in my tracks to ask what I'd prefer between the two choices. These choices didn't really matter to me by answer to make her happy. Now that I know what I know, I think she would make up things to ask me so that I wouldn't suspect her of communicating with another man. My best man, to be specific. She and I held our bachelor parties on the same night. It was extremely disappointing to me when my best man called me to let me know he couldn't attend the bachelor party he planned for me. He told me his mother was in the hospital unexpectedly and he needed to be there with her. Well, this was totally forgivable, right? How could I be so heartless to deny or suspect him? I still had several friends with me throughout the night. I'm an active guy, so we all played basketball outside before getting cleaned up real nice and going to an upscale lounge downtown. I felt like royalty and I hoped my fiancé was feeling the same way. We were actually already living together at this point, but we agreed to abstain from sex the month before the wedding. I had no idea how difficult that was going to be. We took turns each night sleeping on the pull-out bed in the living room. When I arrived home that night, my fiancé was already home and crashed on our bed. She looked like an angel that partied for the first time tonight. I tucked her in while she slept, but as I looked around I noticed something shiny on the floor by the edge of the bed. I picked it up and held it in my hand, looking closely. It was a fancy gold cufflink. How interesting. My wheels immediately started turning. My woman did not own any cufflinks, and I only owned one pair that did not look like this one. That could mean another man was in our bedroom. I started impulsively rubbing my face, head, and neck. This was stressful. Just then, my fiancé's phone went off. It was set to vibrate only, but I could hear it on the nightstand. While she slept, I stood beside her and read her messages. The string that stood out was the one with my best man. The most recent text was from him, 4 hours earlier at 9 p.m. As I scrolled up, I realized she invited him to her bachelorette party, even though that wasn't normally how these things worked. Further up was much worse. She told him that tonight was going to be their night, because the next day she would belong to me. He asked her if he'd ever be able to have her again. She said if he tempted her too much, he might get away with it. Messages from months ago showed how their conversation went from strictly friends to flirty. He started asking about her body, and she started showing him. They made arrangements to hang out one day. A day that I thought she was at work. And then he messaged her, asking if they should have done that. She replied with, "I've never been more sure of anything." Just like that, within 1 hour, I went from a blissful man about to be married, to a broken-hearted fool plotting revenge. I sent myself 6 screenshots of the worst messages they sent, obviously escalating in severity. My plan was to read these messages when I was supposed to read my vows. This was going to be terrible. Just like what she did to me was terrible. I deleted all traces of me collecting evidence, then I took some NyQuil and crashed. The next morning, she was already gone. She left me an old-fashioned handwritten note that said she left early to get her hair and makeup done. Imagine getting all dressed up, only for someone to announce that you're a cheater in front of all your friends and family. What a great day. At this point, I was only bitter. I didn't miss her or want her to be sorry. I was ready to dump her because I couldn't believe how much she let me love her. She was my only one, and I was one of 2. I got dressed really nicely. I smelled wonderful, and my hair was never so on point. A part of me felt like it was for nothing, but I convinced myself it was worth it. I thought about warning my dad about what I planned to do, but I didn't want him to convince me not to or warn other people. Just then, my best friend texted me to ask if I was on my way to the venue. As soon as I got there, he greeted me outside. He was dressed really nicely, but the only thing I wanted to know was if he had cufflinks. In a gamble, I pretended to notice he was missing one, even though I couldn't really tell. He was surprised I noticed and looked embarrassed. He said it must have got caught on something somewhere because he lost it. I asked to see the one he had up close, in case I happened to find the match. At this point, his heart was trying to get out of his chest. He was sweating. I was so amused by this, but played dumb. He showed me the cufflink, and it was an exact match to the one I found and had in my pocket that very moment. I looked up at him very seriously for a few agonizing seconds. I was trying to stop myself from screaming or punching him. He could see it and asked me if I was okay. I snapped myself out of it and plastered on a fake smile. I told him of course I was okay. I was getting married today. I slapped him so hard on the back that it made him jump. I just walked into the venue. After the mind-numbing mingling and grand procession, I realized I never wanted to have a traditional wedding ever again. It all seemed so stupid and meaningless. That's when my would-be wife walked down the aisle. She was as beautiful as ever, and all the memories of how we met and how long we'd been together poured into my head. It was extremely unfair, and I sobbed. People around me seemed to notice that I wasn't happy crying. I was devastated. I barely controlled my sobs until the point where the celebrant asked me if I'd like to read my vows. This was it. I started reading messages between James and my fiancé. I mentioned the date and time of each one. It was just odd at first for everyone to be waiting patiently for me to get to the point. But then, as they listened, I started to read messages that were flirty and not something either of them would be proud of. They started to shift uncomfortably and looked around, noticing that everyone in the building was staring at them. My bride asked me what I was doing and what I was reading. After another text, she told me to stop. Then I read the really inappropriate messages. Him telling her he needed to bury himself inside her again, and her telling him to come over because I left the house. By now, everyone was talking amongst themselves, and my fiancé was trying to grab my phone from me. My best man suddenly walked out, but he was followed by 5 of my groomsmen. As she tried to grab my phone, I shouted that I had pictures and videos they'd send each other if anyone wanted to see them. That's when people started getting up and leaving. The celebrant asked if we were still getting married, and I laughed loudly and sarcastically. My ex was now on her knees in her white dress, sobbing at the altar. Her bridesmaids had no idea what to do. They just stood there, frozen. Some of them might have known she was sleeping with him or at least saw them being flirty. It was great to see that no one rushed to her side to help her feel better. I went outside to see what had become of my best man. His car was trapped between the 5 men. They were yelling and screaming at him, in disbelief that he would betray me as he did. At this point, I was done with all the drama. My head hurt, I felt like I got the revenge I wanted and just needed to take a nap. I told them to back off and let him go, that keeping him here wasn't going to help anything. Just as they backed off, my would-be bride came running out of the venue. She was being chased by her bridesmaids as they shunned her, calling her a terrible person. She ran behind the best man's car for about 10 yards before he saw her in the mirror and stopped. She got in and they left. I turned around and saw a majority of our wedding guests watching what just happened. Many of them walked up to me and offered me hugs and words of advice. It was weird, it was like I was suddenly in a grief counseling session with a mixture of our family and friends. Well, they weren't her friends anymore. Neither of them received support or contact from the people they once relied on and knew so well. They moved out of state together, but only lived together for 1 year. After that, my ex moved back in with her disappointed and criticizing parents. What a gigantic waste of time. She tried to ask me out again after all this, and I called her crazy. I still haven't heard from my best friend, but that's fine. I couldn't be friends with him anymore anyway. My friends and family never let me give up hope or get too depressed. I haven't started dating again, but I know a good girl I'm gonna ask out. It's hard to believe that someone would be with me, and only me. That's because my ex planted a seed of doubt. The only way I know to fight this doubt is to take my time getting close to people. Ask them anything I want to know and tell them what's happened to me so they understand where I'm coming from. Wow, OP. Not many people experience the level of stress you went through here. I love how you had the strength and determination to collect and read messages at the wedding for all to hear. I think it was the best way for her to learn from her mistake. I'm so glad to hear that you had so much support on that day and afterward. You did not deserve to be betrayed like this by your best friend and fiancé of all people. I enjoyed listening to your story and finding that even though they escaped criticism together, they didn't last very long. That had to add another sting of guilt to each of them. I think at that point they definitely realized they screwed up their own lives too, not just everyone they held dear. It sounds like you know how to keep moving forward. Thank you so much for sharing this with us, OP. We appreciate you and your resilient emotional recovery. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's story. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. My flight was delayed by over an hour due to what the airline described as a minor technical issue. I have an aversion to flying anyway, so this didn't do much to boost my confidence. At any rate, it was a pleasant surprise to me that we, after an unusually bumpy flight, landed safely. With a sigh of relief, I walked out of the terminal building on a hot Florida afternoon and eventually got into the large air-conditioned limousine that was waiting for me. Although the thought of having to make the return trip in just a day or two was twirling somewhere in the back of my mind, I had more important things on my mind at the moment. I was once again very nervous as I climbed out of the car outside the hotel. I was in an unfamiliar city, in a country I had only seen in movies and on television. Unfortunately, mostly crime shows. Not the kind of programs that give you confidence in your safety when visiting these places, especially if, like me, you don't travel much. Anyway, as I got out of the car, I was somewhat relieved to find that Paul and Della recognized me immediately and spoke to me. Hi, Mike. We weren't sure you'd make it in time. We'll get the luggage and send it to the room. Now you better get going. She's waiting in the lobby, Della said. Paul gave me a brief nod of greeting and headed to the back of the car to get my suitcase from the driver. I must admit, I hadn't expected the place to be so grand. The hotel lobby was gigantic and there seemed to be several hundred people wandering everywhere. In reality, there were probably no more than 30 or 40. How the hell do they expect me to find a woman I've never seen in my life? God only knows, I asked myself as an extremely attractive woman suddenly appeared in front of me, dressed in a small red, obviously designer, cocktail dress and holding a matching clutch in her left hand. Mike? She asked with a charming smile. Yes, Holly? I whispered back, somewhat stunned by her unexpected beauty. Under the circumstances, Holly was not what I had expected. Holly smiled again, but surprised me even more by hugging me and kissing me on the cheek. Overcoming the initial shock, I summoned up all my courage and returned the favor. Sorry, it must be an English thing. We don't usually hug women we've never met before. By then though, Holly and I had been emailing and talking to each other on the phone for months, preparing for this little encounter. I really didn't know what to expect. Did you have a good flight? She asked. No, Holly, I don't need any more flights. I replied, then explained. A few years ago, I was involved in a very rough landing. In fact, it wasn't far from a crash. The airplane made a real mess, but I think the local scrap metal dealers were pleased. At any rate, it kind of shattered my confidence in air transportation. Had I known that such a beautiful lady would meet me here and I'd be lucky enough to spend an entire evening with her, then maybe the flight wouldn't have been so bad. Thank you. I'm very flattered that such a handsome gentleman would pay me such a compliment. It's not flattery, Holly. In fact, I find you so beautiful that I have to wonder how we ever got into this situation in the first place. I don't know if it was embarrassment or nervousness that made me sway like that. In retrospect, I usually never talked to a woman or flirted the way I did with Holly for the next 2 hours. Notice, looking back at what I actually said, I have to admit that most of the time I was talking absolute nonsense. My mother always said that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Maybe some people's eyes don't see what others see, Holly replied. I'm sorry, but I found the last few months very depressing except for our correspondence. Holly smiled. I thought the whole thing would really upset you. Oh, don't think so, Holly. It was only in the beginning, but then I enjoyed our little emails and chats and it became so necessary that I was really looking forward to it. Honestly, for weeks now, I've been looking forward to coming here and meeting in person. Holly, I looked her over from head to toe. If I'd known how beautiful you were, it's a hell of a surprise. I still don't understand why you chose me. And who better than 34-year-old Mike Crosby married to Avril, Holly grimaced. For 10 years now, they don't have kids. Rumor has it it's Avril's choice. Mike is a maintenance manager at a hospital near where they live. He hates that job, by the way. God, you're so thorough, I exclaimed. No, not me, Mike, but the people I hire. I have some pictures of you. Holly's face flashed with a questioning expression for a second, and another thing. You look very smart in them. Maybe those pictures are the reason I chose you as my secret lover tonight. She smiled at me and winked slightly. I think you're flattering me, Holly, I replied, smiling. Fortunately, at that moment we were interrupted by Paul and Ella, the couple who had met me outside the hotel, coming over to join us. The boy took the luggage to the room. Mike, now are you both ready for the big show? Paul asked. We always are. How about you, Holly? I asked, throwing the ball into her court. Yeah, I think I'm ready, she replied. I looked somewhat reticent, considering we were going through this whole charade at her insistence. Look, Holly, you know you don't have to do this. Once we get in there, you'll realize there's no turning back. I can even go in there myself if you want. Don't be silly, Mike. That would defeat the purpose of the drill, wouldn't it? Do you really think I came all the way from Montreal to miss out on the fun? Come on, be brave. So shall we go? Holly said, taking my hand. But then she looked at Paul and asked, intimate enough. I guess I should have felt awkward, but for some reason I didn't. Come on, guys. Married or not, you all know what it feels like when a beautiful woman gets a little closer than she really should. We all have instincts that can, if you let them, take over in circumstances like this. My baser natural instincts definitely took over, although I was very nervous. I couldn't think of any reason to try to control them. Yeah, come on, guys. You two lovers, you're having a secret date away from your spouses. Make it look right, replied Della in a voice like a movie director. Without my permission, Holly put her left arm around my waist and her right arm around my waist. Then she pressed herself very close to me. Normally, I would have thought close to the point of awkwardness. Yeah, here's the ticket. Go ahead and try it and don't forget all those gooey eyes. Della giggled. It won't be that hard, I replied, looking at Holly beside me. Hey, watch out, Holly. Looks like our Mike is out here on the hunt, Della commented. Holly didn't answer, or rather she couldn't answer because when I looked down at her, she caught me off guard again and kissed me on the lips. Sorry, Mike, she said, sensing my embarrassment. I should have asked, but I need to make sure my lipstick is convincingly smeared. Holly, when you want to smudge your lipstick, don't ask. Maybe I should apply for a full-time job as a lipstick smudger, I said and kissed her. Yeah, well, it's not every day you get a chance to kiss a woman as beautiful as Holly. Married or not, I'm only human. Sorry to interrupt you guys, but are we doing this or not? Because if you want, we can skip right to the bedroom scene. Della laughed. Maybe later on, Holly whispered to me, giggling, before tugging lightly on my waist and dragging me toward the hotel lobby. Despite all her demonstrative bravado, I could sense that Holly was almost as nervous as I was, so I took the remark as nervous chatter. Entering the living room was a bit of a disappointment, really. The place was pretty crowded, but I'll add that I noticed a few guys showing much more than mild interest in the stunning woman in the little red cocktail dress snuggled against my side. Not that I could blame them. I was having a hell of a hard time not looking at the incredible cleavage Holly was showing off in that dress. I think I strutted around looking as important as the cat that ate the canary. It had been a long time since I had been so proud of the woman I was accompanying. Paul and Della took the lead, and we followed them to a table against the wall. The waiter came over, and we ordered our drinks, and I found sitting with my back to most of this room uncomfortable because I could only stare at the stage where a small orchestra was playing. I actually wanted to scrutinize everyone in the place, but that might give the game away. Our drinks arrived, and the four of us made small talk, mostly about my delayed flight. This isn't good. I think we're going to have to up the ante, Paul said. Didn't they see us? Holly asked. Too immersed in themselves, I don't think they've said a word to the other since we came in. Go on, you two, mind your own business. I held out my hand, and Holly took it as we both stood up. I have to warn you, Holly, that I'm not Gene Kelly, I warned her. I'm sure you can handle it, love, Holly replied with a grin. Love? I asked. But that's what you're supposed to be tonight, isn't it? Oh yes, it's a damn shame we have to play these silly games, isn't it? Who's playing? Holly said, winking at me, wrapping both arms around my neck and pulling me to her. I wish, I thought to myself. God, if the guys in the office could see me now. It was already the third set since we'd arrived, and they were playing slower. Oh my God, did I really do that? Holly asked, squeezing into me. I'm sorry, but desirable women usually do that to me, I replied, blushing slightly. I can't say we actually danced, literally. We just swayed in the same spot, slowly twirling around. I have to say it was one of the most enjoyable dances I've had in years. Suddenly another couple pushed us slightly. You've been spotted, Paul whispered. Be careful, you might look the wrong way. Concentrate on the dance. I looked at Holly again, who was smiling charmingly back at me. Holly, you're one hell of an actress, I thought to myself. You know, I hope the balloon doesn't go up too soon. I like that, I told her. I can feel it, love, she said with a cheeky grin, and then pressed herself even tighter against me. I wonder, Holly, if you have sadistic tendencies, I remarked, smiling. I like to tease, Mike. This evening was the best joke I could think of. I don't know what expression appeared on my face, but it made Holly laugh out loud. I only wished I really was the person she was really teasing, but I knew the good Lord could never look at me so favorably. Oh, don't look so dejected, Mike. After all, you don't have to rush back to the UK, do you? We can always take a few days to enjoy the Florida sunshine. Now that we've been spotted, let's make it look really good. Next thing I know, Holly's head is resting on my shoulder, and she's chewing on my neck and earlobe. Hey, take it easy, girl, or I'll have an accident. I warned. Holly giggled in response and, more importantly, didn't stop her manipulations. She doubled down on them, for that matter. Much to my relief, the band's performance ended before I lost control, and we returned to our table. Holly was walking, holding my hand and dragging me along behind her. When we got closer, Paul gestured for us to sit down, but his eyes were fixed on something that was happening across the room. That's right. He's on his way. When he comes over, you can stand there and argue with him. But don't raise your hand at him, Mike. We can handle any rough stuff. That's what we're paid to do. Paul said, stepping forward. Is she coming? I asked. No, I don't think she realized it was you. That's if she saw you at all. She was standing with her back to the dance floor. But she's watching intently now, so she'll probably spot you as soon as you stand up and turn around. What the hell is going on here, Holly? What are you doing here, and what the hell are you playing with that asshole? Who is he anyway? Asked an angry voice from somewhere not far from my left shoulder. I stood up and turned to face the guy. Holly was dancing with that asshole, just like you no doubt danced with my wife. Well, yeah. At that moment, that was the best I could think of. I didn't know what I was going to say when the confrontation started. Holly, on the other hand, who also stood up, had obviously rehearsed her little speech well. And he'll probably have me later while you're sleeping with his wife in room 642. By the way, we have 643 right across the hall, but we'll try not to make as much noise as you two did last night, Holly said with a smile on her face and put her arm around my shoulders. I really could have done without Holly at this point because her husband, who was much bigger than I thought he was, could very well have pounced on me, and Holly hanging on to me limited my maneuvering. But I really didn't have to worry about him. Avril's appearance on stage, I suppose after she'd spotted me as soon as I stood up, was much more, exciting. Honestly, Avril came out of nowhere and hit me in the forehead, obviously on the run. Effectively knocking Holly's husband off his feet, she pushed him out of the way. In a way, it was convenient because it took away some of Avril's momentum. Holly's husband laid down on some poor woman's lap before he fell to the floor. Notice I didn't see this. I was lying on the floor myself looking at my very angry wife. I think the fall to the floor shook Avril up a bit, as it did me. Anyway, she ended up lying on top of me, looking me in the face. What the hell were you doing with that slut? She asked demandingly. Dancing, as you can see, I replied, still without the jazzy cuteness. It looks like you were trying to fuck that girl, she objected. Come on, Avril, I just got here. I haven't had a chance yet. You've been sleeping with her husband for at least the last 2 days. I was pleased with myself. I had taken my first good shot. Yeah, but don't be so stupid, Mike. Where did you get this stupid idea? Avril said, rolling off me and sitting up. How did you even get here? You don't fly, do you? Yes, but not when I want to catch my wife with her lover, I answered. I was good at that backhanded stuff. That's bullshit, Mike. You know I'm here on a business trip. Avril, your business trip was to Houston. It's freaking Florida. You and your company have no business being here in Miami. You had a meeting in Houston, and then you flew here. And you've spent the last 2 nights horizontal tangoing with that creep in room 643. 642, lover, 643 is our room, Holly's voice corrected me from somewhere. Yes, sorry, room 642. Do you want to see the tapes, Avril? I asked. I had no idea if Holly had any tapes from this trip, but I knew that she had many from their previous dates. I figured Avril wouldn't really want to see them. Avril just sat on the floor and looked at me. I have to admit that this was the first time I had ever seen this woman speechless. No, not like that. I remember the first time I slept with her before we were even married. By the time I was done with her, she was lying there speechless. I always thought I'd shaken all the chatter out of her. Well, it wasn't a disappointment to her. She came back for more the next night and eventually married me. What a shame. Suddenly someone's hands helped us to our feet, and the next thing I really realized, besides Holly's arm around my waist again, was Paul saying, Morgan Ardent, you're served. And he handed Holly's rather disheveled husband an envelope. I wonder what I missed that made Morgan so disheveled. Paul then quickly did the same to Avril. Although our British divorce petitions don't really have to be presented as formally as the Yanks do, I could send them by registered mail, I guess. Holly and I just figured it would add a bit of spice if it was done officially, and at the same time as the papers were handed to her husband. The two guys who followed the two lovers along with the rest of the company were then handed the papers. Holly took care of everything. Avril and Morgan worked for an American company, so we both sued her in the American courts for turning a blind eye to what was going on with the couple. Their bosses, who were served papers, had their girlfriends too. So I think the bloody company must have turned a blind eye to everything. Eventually, Paul filed a lawsuit against Morgan Ardent for alienation of affection, which Holly's lawyers filed precisely in the American courts on my behalf. It had been years since anyone had successfully done such a thing in the UK. It ended as abruptly as it began. I really have no idea where or when Avril disappeared. Holly said she was led away in tears by one of her boss's girlfriends, but I didn't see her leave. I did, however, see Holly's husband being led away by two guys. Notice, not before he threw me a look that I thought should have turned me to stone. So what now? I asked Holly. We're dancing. She responded with a smile and dragged me to the dance floor again. The rest of the evening turned into a bit of a party. I have no idea at what time the party ended. I'm afraid I had too much to drink myself, but I do remember a conversation we overheard in the elevator. One of the hotel staff was telling a couple how lucky they were because the hotel was full, but for some reason the couple in 642 had suddenly checked out. The housekeeping staff was still in room 642 when Holly, Paul, Della, and I entered room 643. Too bad. It takes away from the rest of the fun of the evening, Holly said. I couldn't wait to see their faces when we walked out of that room together in the morning. Maybe it's not such a bad thing. It might give their lawyers leverage in court, Paul commented. Paul, I have enough information on what these two have been doing for the last 6 months to get 2 divorces. Besides, I have the prenup that my father insisted on. He never thought much of Morgan. Yeah, but what about Mike? They don't have prenuptial agreements in the UK. I'm still screwed, Paul. My lawyer thinks it's going to be 50-50. The only light in the sky is that Avril makes more money than me, I said. Yeah, I think heads are about to fly in this company and Morgan and Avril will be first on the list. My uncle is a major shareholder and he's already on the case, Holly informed us. I had a hard time slowing him down or we would have missed out on today's fun. There wasn't really that much going on. Not a lot of fireworks. Quite an expense on your part, Holly, for something that could have been done at home, I said, voicing my thoughts. Ah, Mike, the look on Morgan's face when you said he slept with your wife was classic. He had no idea who you were. Did I say that? No, not in those words. You're too much of a, but I did. And the look on Morgan's face when he realized he hadn't caught me, I had, or rather we had caught them, was something special. And then Avril burst through like a defender at the finish line. The funniest thing I've seen in a long time, Holly said and laughed out loud. God knows how long we chatted about nothing in particular, but eventually made it to bed. Oh, I better remind you that room 643 was a suite. I had one bedroom and Holly had the other. When we went to bed, Paul and Della were sitting in the living room. When we got up in the morning, they were sitting there. Apparently, Paul was a court officer. I have no idea what that means. But I realized that the American courts would take his words almost as gospel, meaning he could swear that Holly and I didn't spend the night in the same bed. So Mike, what's your plan now? Holly asked me at breakfast. I'm not sure I'm going home to lick my wounds, I answered. Well, the lovers are gone. Why don't you and I fly to Vegas for a few days before you come home? That's a good idea, Holly, but I'm going back to the UK. I'm sorry, but adding another flight to Las Vegas is not my idea of a good time. Holly sat there quite obviously thinking for a few moments. Flying upsets you that much, doesn't it? Okay, alternative idea. A close friend of mine has a house in the Bahamas. Why don't we go there for a few days? Don't worry, we can go by boat and you won't even have to risk me driving. I had to think about it, but not for very long. After crossing the Atlantic, it would have been silly to fly straight to the UK, considering I had almost 2 weeks of summer vacation left. I had to get back home because there was bound to be a real old ding-dong. The house was already on the market and I'd converted everything to cash so she wouldn't empty all the joint accounts. Keep in mind that even though my lawyer oversaw all the changes I made, I still thought I was going to screw up. It was his job to keep me from going completely broke. Yeah, why not? A good ferry cruise should be fun. But can you just show up at your friends' houses uninvited? Of course I have a standing invitation. I don't visit them as often as I should. What about dragging me along? Oh, they'll probably love you more than Morgan. They never thought much of him, Holly replied with a chuckle. What can I say? The cab dropped us off at what looked to me like a rather fancy boat or even a private yacht. It turned out to be some kind of charter fishing boat and it had impressive acceleration. During the trip to the Bahamas, Holly spent most of her time sunbathing on deck in a tiny bikini. I spent time on the bridge where the captain was supposedly showing me how to steer the boat while we were actually gazing at Holly's slender body. Daddy, said Holly, hugging the old man who met us on the quay. This is Mike. That was his wife Morgan was playing with, Holly said, introducing us. Hi, son, he said, shaking my hand and then Holly's. I told you you could never trust that little shit. But no, you always thought you knew better. All right, Mike, let's get you home and change you into something appropriate. I realized that my business suit was not considered appropriate attire for the Bahamas. At the house, a large cluttered structure that bore little resemblance to the homes I'd been in before, I met Holly's mother who greeted me like a long-lost son. Shame on my reserved English nature. When Holly's father escorted me to my room though, things got a little official. Let's just say he made sure I understood where my room was and that's where he and his wife expected me to sleep. You get the idea. The next 4 days were really enjoyable. When Holly and I weren't sunbathing or swimming in the pool, I was either fishing off the boat with Holly's dad or we were at numerous cocktail parties in the evenings. At 2 of them, Holly danced with me, but she was somewhat more chaste than she had been that first night at the Miami hotel. On the last night before we left, Holly and I were finishing an evening stroll along the beach in the moonlight. We weren't in each other's arms, but she was holding my hand. We talked about how upset I was that my divorce was going to cost me the house I'd spent so many years remodeling to my taste. Avril always let me do whatever I wanted with the house. She just picked out the color scheme and everything. The extension and even the kitchen and bathrooms were always in my plan, as was my garage and workshop. God, how I'm going to miss that workshop. Mike, I want to apologize, Holly said suddenly. Apologize for what, Holly? Well, that first night in Miami, I got a little ahead of myself. Holly, we were both very nervous about what was going to happen. I think we both drank a little more than we should have and said some things we shouldn't have. It served as a cover for our nervousness. That's all we have to worry about. I know, but I'd hate for you to think that I would flirt with someone like that. Shit, don't be silly, girl. I understand perfectly well. I have to apologize. I really didn't control myself like I should have. Yeah, I noticed, big boy. Anyway, we're not the kind of people who give in to our baser instincts like Morgan and Avril, are we? Absolutely not, Holly. We've been together for almost 5 days and we haven't even kissed since that first night. Why do you think that is? I'm not really sure. You're a very attractive woman and I enjoyed being your official lipstick, but we have to take into consideration that in some ways, we are both on what you might call a rebound. How many relationships are known that would have lasted normally when they started under these circumstances? Yes, I have to admit that they usually result in heartache for everyone at the end, Holly said quietly. Besides, we're still married, Holly, even if our spouses seem to have overlooked that fact. Yes, you're right. We're above that kind of behavior, aren't we? Unfortunately, I replied. Does that mean you can't smudge my lipstick at least once before you leave? Holly, like I said, I'm pretty damn sure I'd be happy to apply for a full-time job as your lipstick smudger. Okay, I spent the next half hour or so watching Holly's lipstick smudge. During this time, Holly tried to find out if my tonsils were still intact by using her tongue as a probe. By the time we got back to her parents' house, however, we were acting like rank good friends. The next day, the same boat took us back to the mainland with even more speed than before. Then Holly walked me to the airport for my flight back to the UK. Come on, I smeared Holly's lipstick again before getting on the plane. When I finally got back to the house, Avril was already waiting for me. Surprisingly, there weren't many fireworks. Hi, sorry, Mike, I messed up, didn't I? Said a very depressed Avril when I found her sitting in the kitchen. I just can't understand why, Avril. I thought we had a good thing going here. Yeah, Mike, I just got caught up in my work. I'm really sorry that all of this came to me. I really didn't mean to cheat on you or anything. God, Mike, I still love you. Yeah, so how do you feel about him? Hell, please don't ask. He flattered and seduced me. I acted like a stupid little schoolgirl. Did you, with his wife? Avril was all I had to say. Hell, I might have known you wouldn't do that. Now you're gonna tell me we don't stand a chance, aren't you? You know me better than I know myself, Avril. When do you want me to move out, or will you? Provided you don't bring any of your lovers here, Avril, we can both live here until the house is sold. That will give us both time to find some decent accommodation. And the divorce, I'm willing to change the grounds to irreconcilable differences, provided we can come to an amicable agreement on finances. That should get us a quick divorce. Take the papers and show me where to sign, Mike. I messed up, so I won't give you any more trouble, Avril said humbly. That's how it really was. The divorce went through within a few months. It didn't take long to sell the house. It had been on the market for less than 2 months when a real estate agent came along and bought it on behalf of his client. Strange guy never struck me as a real estate agent. At any rate, we never even saw the buyers or knew their names. After much negotiation, he even bought almost all the furniture. I was moving into rented furnished accommodation, and Avril, having been fired by her employer, suddenly found herself being hunted by another American company. She left England for California before the divorce was even finalized. I don't know, maybe 2 months later I got a call from the agent of the people who bought our house. It seems my client is having some trouble controlling the central heating system, Mr. Crosby. We were wondering if you could kindly pop in to see them tonight and explain how to do it, he asked. I don't see why they would have any problems. It's a pretty standard system. But then again, that damn electronic timer is a bit of a crapshoot to get your head around. Yeah, tell them I'll stop by tonight on my way home from work and see if there's anything I can do to help. By the way, what are their names? I asked. Thank you, Mr. Crosby. I'll tell them to expect you around 7:30, goodbye. He answered, and the connection went dead. That's strange. I remember thinking, how the hell did he know I was getting there at 7:30? That was the time I always came home from work when I lived there, and the bastard hung up on me without giving me his name. The garden looked pretty much the same when I turned into the driveway. That's if you ignore the little sign proudly informing everyone that the new homeowner was using some local gardening company to mow the lawns, etc. There were no cars in the driveway, so I parked in my old spot. With a heavy heart, I walked to the front door and pressed the button. It's very strange, coming back to the house you used to live in and finding that you have to ring the doorbell instead of just putting the key in the lock and walking in. Who is it? There was a voice from behind the closed door. "Mike Crosby," I shouted back. I came in to explain the heating system. I could hear all the locks and deadbolts I had installed on that door with my own hands being pushed back and opened. Most of them were for when we went to bed or left the house empty. I never expected anyone to use them all the time. Finally, the door opened and a girl of about 18 opened the door and invited me in. "The landlady is waiting in the living room." The girl said it very precisely, as if she had rehearsed the line. Then she giggled and ran into the kitchen. After knocking, I opened the living room door. "I'm Mike Crosby. I believe you're having some trouble with the central heating," I said to the woman with her back to me, looking out into the garden behind the house. "No, the heating is working fine, Mike. What I'm really looking for is someone to smear my lipstick on," she said, turning and coming into my arms. Epilogue: It's funny how things can turn out, but I never got to spend another night alone in my apartment. Holly and I got married less than 2 months later. I no longer work at the hospital. I am now a joint representative for Holly's father, along with Holly, in the UK and Europe. This guy gets involved in everything he can think of. To be honest, I'm a bit of a mess most of the time, although I do pick up a few things from Holly as I go along. Not that there's much to do there other than represent. I get the feeling that Holly's dad just wants to make sure I can afford to keep Holly the way she's used to. Anyway, in a few months, Holly's gonna have to stop chasing me all over Europe. Well, you can't carry a baby around with you, can you? No, I still wouldn't fly if I could. Honestly, life since we've been married has been like one long car vacation, a very nice one in a brand new Beamer. What do people call it? Oh yes, I think I fell on my feet and also fell in love with one of the most beautiful women in the world. Most nights when we go away, we spend in luxury hotels. I've realized that the nights are more exhausting than the driving, as I've discovered that Holly can be insatiable at times. God only knows how Morgan found the strength to sleep with Avril, but Holly insists that I'm much better than Morgan in that regard. Perhaps he never gave Holly and her needs as much attention as she deserved. Mind you, sometimes I think my new wife has a really twisted sense of humor. One morning, I was coming out of our home bathroom and saw Holly say thank you to a picture she had hidden in one of the dresser drawers. Then she looked very embarrassed when she realized I had seen it. I, of course, asked who was in the picture. "You won't believe this. It's a portrait of your ex-wife Avril," Holly replied with a smile. "Well, Mike, you have to admit that if Avril hadn't let Morgan talk her into bed with him, I never would have found you, would I? I'll always have a soft spot for her, you know." Yes, that's a different way of looking at things. I walked over to the dresser and picked up the picture. "Thank you, Avril. I never would have thought that the way you run around me and cheat on me would eventually lead me to such happiness," I said. Then I put the picture back in the drawer and turned my attention back to the woman who really mattered to me. It must have been almost lunchtime when we went out for some fresh air again and went downstairs for breakfast. God, was I really that tired? Man, I was buzzing with excitement as I pulled into the driveway, a whole day earlier than planned. I was picturing the look on Jess's face, how she'd jump into my arms, and little Sammy's laughter. But then, there it was, this shiny red Mazda I'd never seen before parked right where my old Chevy should be. Confusion hit me like a sucker punch. I got out, my heart already doing this weird drum. The front door was unlocked. Odd. Inside, the house was too quiet. Then, from upstairs, laughter, not the innocent kind, but something else, something that made my gut twist. I took the stairs 2 at a time, a bad feeling creeping up my spine. And there they were, Jess and Mike, my golf buddy, in our bedroom with my wife. They didn't even hear me come in, too caught up in there, whatever it was. My world stopped. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion, and I was the guy in the driver's seat. Jess saw me first. Her eyes went wide, like she'd seen a ghost. Mike, that jerk, he just froze, sheet barely covering him. The room spun, and every corny line from every bad movie about cheating spouses played in my head. What the hell, Jess? I remember my voice sounded weird, like it was someone else talking. She started babbling, trying to cover up, saying it wasn't what it looked like. Yeah, right, Mike mumbled something, looking for his clothes. I couldn't even look at him. This was a guy I'd shared beers and secrets with. And now this? How long? That was all I could muster. Jess was crying now, saying it was a mistake, that it meant nothing. But her words, they sounded hollow, empty. I felt this rage building up, but at the same time, I was just broken, you know? The argument got heated, I was throwing words like bullets, not caring where they hit. Jess was pleading, saying she was sorry, that she'd been lonely. I didn't want to hear any of it. It was like watching our life together turn to ashes right there. I stormed out, leaving her crying and Mike scrambling to get dressed. The last thing I heard was Jess calling my name, but it was too late. Something had shattered inside me, something I knew couldn't be fixed. I drove off, my mind a mess of anger, betrayal, and 1,000 questions with no answers. How long had it been going on? Had everyone known but me? The hurt was a physical thing, clawing at my chest. So much for the surprise homecoming, huh? Never thought I'd be sitting in a dingy motel room, my life turned upside down. Just yesterday, I was on top of the world, coming home early to surprise my family. Now, here I am, staring at peeling wallpaper, trying to digest Jess's confession. A long-term affair, with my best friend, no less. It felt like a bad dream, except I couldn't wake up. Jess cried her eyes out, saying it started as something small, something meaningless. But you know what? It didn't matter how it started. It mattered that it happened. She kept saying she was sorry, that she never meant to hurt me. Sorry? That word seemed so small, so useless now. I couldn't stay there, not another second. I grabbed my keys, walked out, and just drove. No destination, no plan, just the need to be anywhere but there. The roads were empty, kind of like how I felt inside, hollow, echoing with every word Jess had said. Ended up at this motel on the outskirts of town. The guy at the front desk gave me a look, probably thought I was up to no good. If only he knew. I crashed on the bed, but sleep was a stranger that night. My mind replayed every moment of our marriage, searching for signs I must have missed. Morning came, and with it, a decision. I couldn't let this slide. I found a divorce lawyer online, someone discreet. We met at a coffee shop, away from prying eyes. I couldn't risk Jess or anyone else finding out before I was ready. The lawyer, Mr. Henderson, was a straight shooter. He laid it out plain and simple. Divorce was messy, but given the circumstances, it was straightforward. Then he dropped a bombshell I hadn't even considered. The paternity test. Sammy, my boy, was he even mine? That hit me harder than the affair. The thought of losing Sammy, of him not being mine. It was like a punch to the gut. Mr. Henderson said it was standard procedure in these cases, but nothing about this felt standard. I agreed to the test, not knowing it was eating me up inside. Henderson arranged everything discreetly. I drove back to the motel, feeling like a character in some tragic movie. Except this was real life, my life, and I had no idea how this scene was going to end. You know, they say hope's a dangerous thing. Can lift you up, then drop you from 100 feet. I was clinging to this thin thread of hope that Sammy was mine. But when I got those paternity test results, that thread snapped. Not my kid. Not my son. I can't describe that feeling. Like falling into a cold, dark pit. I confronted Jess. Had to. I needed to hear it from her, needed her to look me in the eyes and say it. She was at home, looking like a ghost of herself. When I showed her the test results, she just crumbled. Everything came out. the affair, the lies, and yeah, Sammy. He was conceived during her fling with Mike. I remember she kept saying she was sorry, but it sounded so far away. My mind was racing, heart pounding in my ears. It was surreal, you know? Here was this woman I'd loved, trusted, and she'd just torn our world apart. Sammy, the kid I'd raised, played with, loved, he wasn't mine. The betrayal stung, but losing Sammy, that was a whole other kind of pain. Filing for divorce felt like the only thing left to do. I couldn't stay with Jess, not after all this. The trust was gone, love turned to ash. It's funny, in a sad way. You think you know someone, share your life with them, and then one day, it's like you never knew them at all. I met with Mr. Henderson again, told him I wanted to file for divorce, citing Jess's infidelity. He didn't seem surprised, maybe he's seen it all before. Paperwork, signatures, legal jargon, it was all a blur. I was just going through the motions, like a robot. Jess pleaded with me, said we could work it out for Sammy's sake. But how do you stay for a child that isn't yours? How do you look past such a lie? I couldn't. Maybe I was weak, maybe I was angry, but I just couldn't. That night, in the quiet of my motel room, I thought about everything. The happy days, the laughs, the plans we'd made. All gone. I thought about Sammy, how his laughter used to fill up the house. Now, there was just this deafening silence, a void where my heart used to be. I know some people bounce back from stuff like this. They find a way to forgive, to rebuild. But for me, it was the end of a chapter. A painful, gut-wrenching chapter. I had to close it, had to try and find a way to start over. Alone. Ever had that moment when you're standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing you gotta jump but scared as hell? That was me, the day Jess begged me for another chance. She was crying, promising she'd change, that we could fix things. But some breaks, they're just too deep to mend. I told her no. It was the hardest word I'd ever had to say. Part of me still loved her, you know? But a bigger part was just done. Too much hurt, too many lies. I was determined to move on, to find some semblance of peace. That's when the real storm hit. Divorce proceedings started, and man, it was like opening Pandora's box. Everything got public and messy real fast. Our once quiet, happy life became the talk of the town. People I'd known for years, neighbors, friends, they all had something to say about it. Word got out about Jess's affair. It spread like wildfire, the kind of juicy gossip that small towns thrive on. I'd go to the grocery store and hear whispers, see the looks. It was like we were on display, our private pain turned into public spectacle. And then, the picking sides started. It's crazy how these things go down. Friends we'd had dinner with, celebrated holidays with, suddenly they were choosing camps. Some sided with Jess, trying to be sympathetic to her mistakes. Others patted me on the back, saying I was better off without her. Family tensions rose too. Jess's parents, they wouldn't even look at me. Like I was the one who'd done something wrong. My own folks were furious, said they'd always had a bad feeling about her. I didn't need their, I told you so's, but there they were, served up at every family dinner. Everywhere I went, it felt like I was walking through a minefield. Old friends became strangers, strangers became judges. I'd see Mike sometimes, in town, and the anger would bubble up all over again. But I kept my cool, mostly. Didn't want to give the town more to talk about. This whole process, it wasn't just about signing papers and splitting assets. It was like reliving the betrayal, over and over. Every legal document, every court date, it was a reminder of what we'd lost, of how far we'd fallen. But through it all, I kept my focus. I had to get through this, had to close this chapter of my life. The house, the memories, Jess, even the friends who turned their backs, they were all part of a past I needed to leave behind. I was looking forward to that final court date, to the moment when I could finally say I was free. Free to start over, to rebuild. It was a faint light at the end of a very dark tunnel, but it was something. Something to hold on to. Life's got this funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. After the whirlwind of the divorce, I thought I'd seen it all. But then came the news that Mike, the guy who'd helped turn my life upside down, had bailed on Jess. Scared of the public scorn, he took off, leaving her to face the music alone. Can't say I was surprised, but part of me felt a weird satisfaction. Karma, right? In the midst of all this, the custody battle for Sammy was raging. It was the hardest part, fighting for a kid I'd raised as my own, but who wasn't my blood. The court saw things my way, though. They looked at Jess's infidelity, her unstable situation, and they granted me custody. Winning felt bittersweet. I was glad to have Sammy, but the circumstances, man, they were messed up. The divorce settlement was another blow to Jess. She lost the majority of our shared assets. The house, some of our joint savings, it all came to me. I didn't want it to be a battle, but things just played out that way. Jess was left struggling, both financially and socially. Her affair had cost her more than she'd probably ever imagined. I started anew, got myself a small apartment. It was nothing fancy, but it was a fresh start, a place free of all the memories that haunted me in our old home. Decorating it, filling it with new stuff, it felt like I was slowly piecing my life back together, one day at a time. Jess, on the other hand, she had it rough. I heard through the grapevine that she was struggling to make ends meet. Her social circle had shrunk too, with most of our mutual friends siding with me. I won't lie, there was a part of me that thought she got what she deserved. But another part, maybe the part that once loved her, felt sorry for her. Life in my new apartment was different. It was quieter, less chaotic. I missed the noise sometimes, missed the family life I thought I had. But this new silence gave me space to think, to reflect, to figure out who I was without Jess. Sammy visited on weekends. It was hard, explaining to him why things had changed, why Mom and Dad weren't together anymore. I tried to keep it simple, tried to shield him from the ugly truths. He was just a kid, after all. Seeing him in my new place, laughing and playing, it gave me hope. Hope that maybe we could get through this, that we could find some semblance of normalcy in this new life. As for Jess, I heard she moved to a smaller place, something more affordable. People said she was looking for work, trying to get back on her feet. Part of the town still whispered about her, about what she'd done. I guess some stains are hard to wash off. It's strange, you know, how life works out. One day you're up, the next you're down. But through it all, you just keep going, keep moving forward. That's what I was doing, one step at a time, in my little apartment, with Sammy by my side. Life, you know, has a way of turning around when you least expect it. Amidst all the chaos, something good started happening. My business, which I'd poured my heart into, suddenly began to take off. It was like the universe saying, "Hey, it's your time now." Success brought a new kind of energy, a reason to get out of bed each morning with a smile. But just as things were looking up for me, Jess reached out. She wanted to talk, said she missed us, wanted to try again. But for me, that ship had sailed. I couldn't go back to what we had, not after everything. So, I declined, as gently as I could. It wasn't about revenge, it was about moving forward. Jess's life, meanwhile, took a nosedive. She was facing isolation, not just from our old friends, but from her own family too. Her parents, who'd once treated me like a son, now disowned her. They were ashamed of her actions, couldn't understand how she'd thrown away what we had. It was sad, really. I knew Jess was struggling, trying to find her way back to some kind of normalcy, but it seemed like the world had turned its back on her. Back in our little town, people started looking at me differently. Where once there were whispers and stares, now there was sympathy, understanding, and even support. I'd bump into old friends at the grocery store, and instead of awkward silence, there were pats on the back, kind words. It was comforting, sure, but it also felt a bit surreal. I was the same guy, just a bit more broken, a bit more cautious. It was tough hearing about how Jess's parents had disowned her. Despite everything, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity. That was someone I had loved, someone I had planned to spend my life with. And now, she was out there, alone, cut off from the people who should have been her support system. In a way, our roles had reversed. I used to be the one shrouded in whispers and pity. Now, it was Jess. I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a small part of me that felt vindicated, but mostly, it just made me sad. Sad for what we had lost, for what could have been. My business success kept me busy, kept my mind off the mess of my personal life. It was a blessing, really. Work became my sanctuary, a place where I could create, grow, and forget about the heartache for a while. As for Jess, I heard she was trying to rebuild bridges, but it was a slow process. People's memories are long, and forgiveness doesn't come easy in a small town. I hoped, for her sake, she'd find some peace, some way to make amends and move forward. Life's too short to live in perpetual regret. And me? I was just taking it one day at a time, enjoying the little successes, and learning to live again. The business, my little beacon of hope, was growing, and so was I. Life's a roller coaster, huh? Just when you think you're stuck in a loop, it shoots you off in a new direction. That's how I felt when I started dating again. Casual stuff, nothing serious. It was like dipping my toes in the after years of being afraid to swim. It felt good, liberating even, to meet new people, to have conversations that weren't weighed down by my past. Meanwhile, Jess moved to a smaller town. A fresh start, I guess. I couldn't blame her. The air in our town was thick with whispers about us, especially her. But you know how small towns are, news travels fast, and so do rumors. I heard through the grapevine that her new community was already wary of her because of her past. It's tough, starting over with that kind of baggage. In the midst of this, Sammy reached out to me. The kid was confused and hurt, and who could blame him? His world had been turned upside down just like mine. It was a tricky situation. He wasn't my biological son, but those years of raising him, they meant something. They meant a lot, actually. So, I decided to maintain a role in his life, distant but supportive. I couldn't just turn my back on the kid. That wouldn't be fair to him. Navigating these new relationships wasn't easy. Dating felt like walking through a minefield blindfolded. I was always careful, didn't want to rush into anything. The women I met, they were great, but I kept them at arm's length. Couldn't risk getting too close, not yet. I was still healing, still figuring out who I was outside of my marriage. And Sammy, he needed me, in his own way. We'd meet up, grab a bite to eat, talk about school, sports, normal stuff. I could see the questions in his eyes, the ones he was too scared to ask. Why aren't you and Mom together anymore? Why did everything change? I tried to answer as best as I could without hurting him more. I wanted to protect him from the ugly truths. Jess's situation weighed on me, despite everything. I heard about her struggles, about how she was trying to rebuild her life in a place where nobody trusted her. It wasn't easy for her, and part of me felt guilty for that. But then I'd remember the betrayal, and that guilt would fade. She made her choices, and those choices had consequences. Life was moving forward, slowly but surely. Dating. Dealing with the fallout of the divorce, maintaining a connection with Sammy, it was a lot. But I was managing, finding a new rhythm in this strange dance of life. There were moments of loneliness, moments of doubt, but I was learning. Learning to trust again, to open up, to maybe, just maybe, find love again. Sammy's presence in my life was a constant reminder of the good times, the happy memories. He was the bridge between my past and my future, a connection I wasn't ready to let go of. And as for Jess, I hoped she'd find her way too, find some peace in her new life. We were both starting over, in our own ways. Life's funny, isn't it? Just when you think you've got it figured out, it throws you a curveball. That's what happened with me and my new relationship. We'd been seeing each other for a while, and things just clicked. Before I knew it, we were talking about getting serious, and then, engagement. It felt right, like a second chance at happiness. Something I never thought I'd get again. On the flip side, Jess was trying to put her life back together too. She'd been trying to start a new relationship, but things weren't going so smooth for her. The past has of clinging to you, and in a small town, people's memories are long. I heard she was struggling, that it was hard for her to find someone who could look past everything that happened. As for me, I was over the moon when my girlfriend said yes. We started planning a modest wedding, nothing fancy. Just a small gathering of close friends and family. It was a new beginning, a fresh start. But as we dived into wedding plans, I couldn't help but think about Jess. Was it wrong to feel a twinge of guilt? Maybe, but I did. Jess's struggle hit a new low. She was battling depression, reeling from all the losses she'd faced. It's one thing to hear about an ex struggling, but it's another to know they're suffering because of choices that involved you. I felt for her, despite everything. I wouldn't wish that kind of pain on anyone. The news of my engagement spread quickly, as news does in small towns. Jess heard about it, and I heard that it hit her hard. She felt a deep sense of loss, they said. It's strange, you know, how life takes these turns. Here I was, starting a new chapter, filled with hope and happiness, and there she was, stuck in a chapter that had long closed. I often caught myself thinking about how our paths had diverged so drastically. Once, we had shared dreams, plans for the future. Now, our lives couldn't be more different. It was a sobering realization, a reminder of how fragile happiness can be, how easily life can be upended. As the wedding day approached, I found myself reflecting on the past. Not with anger or regret, but with a kind of acceptance. What happened with Jess, it was a part of my story, but it wasn't the whole story. I had a future to look forward to, a life to rebuild. And Jess, well, I hoped she'd find her way out of the darkness. Everyone deserves a shot at redemption, at happiness. So, as I planned for the wedding, I made a silent wish for Jess, hoping she'd find peace, maybe even love again. Life goes on, it always does. And sometimes, just sometimes, it gives you a second chance. Life's about moving forward, right? That's what I kept telling myself as my fiancé and I stood in front of our new house. It wasn't just a building. It was our fresh start, a symbol of new beginnings. The place was modest, but filled with hope and possibilities. We were turning pages, leaving old chapters behind and writing new ones. Meanwhile, Jess's struggles seemed to deepen. I heard from mutual friends that she'd lost her job. It was a tough break, especially with everything else she was dealing with. Her spiral into despair was like a dark cloud hanging over her life. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy. Despite our past, I never wanted this kind of hardship for her. Our wedding day came, and it was exactly what we wanted, beautiful but low-key. A small ceremony with the people who mattered most. As I stood there, exchanging vows with my new wife, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. It was a moment of closure, a final seal on the past and a hopeful gaze into the future. But life has a way of reminding you of things you'd rather forget. Right after the wedding, Jess tried to reach out to me. I don't know what she wanted. Maybe to congratulate me, or perhaps seek closure for herself. But I couldn't go back there, couldn't reopen old wounds. So, I chose to ignore her attempts. It might seem harsh, but some bridges are better left uncrossed. The news of my new wife's pregnancy came as a joyous shock. We were going to have a baby. It felt like life was rewarding us, giving us a gift after a storm. We announced it to our friends and family, and the outpouring of love and support was overwhelming. This baby, it was a symbol of our love, a beacon of our shared future. I often wondered about Jess during this time. The news of our pregnancy would inevitably reach her, and I couldn't help but think about how it would affect her. It must be hard, watching someone you once shared a life with move on in such significant ways while you're struggling to keep your head above water. But as I looked around our new home, felt the excitement of impending fatherhood, I knew I had made the right choices. Moving on wasn't just about leaving someone behind. It was about embracing the future, embracing hope. Jess's journey was her own to make, and I sincerely hoped she'd find her footing. As for me and my new family, we were just at the beginning of a beautiful journey. A journey filled with love, challenges, and the promise of new life. It was time to look ahead, to build a future filled with laughter, love, and happiness. A future where the past was just a distant memory. Ever noticed how life has a way of balancing things out? Well, as my life started taking this beautiful turn, with a new baby and a loving family, Jess's life took the opposite route. I heard through the grapevine she'd become something of a recluse. It's weird, thinking about someone who was once so vibrant and full of life now shunned by the very friends we once shared. Our baby's arrival was nothing short of a miracle. Holding that tiny bundle of joy, I felt a happiness I hadn't known was possible. My wife and I, we were a team, building this warm, loving environment for our little one. It was like the universe was making up for the rough patch with an abundance of joy. Jess, on the other hand, struggled to start afresh. Her past seemed to follow her like a shadow. I'd occasionally hear about her attempts to rebuild her life, to start over. But the whispers of her past mistakes seemed to haunt her at every turn. It's tough to move forward when your past clings to you so tightly. Sitting in our living room one evening, watching my wife and our baby sleeping peacefully, I couldn't help but reflect on my journey. From the heartache and betrayal to this moment of peace and contentment. I felt grateful, Grateful for the new beginnings, for the second chance at happiness. But the story of our lives isn't just about the happy endings. As much as my life had flourished, Jess's had taken a downturn. She was living alone, isolated from the friends and life she once knew. I heard she spent a lot of time reflecting on her choices and their consequences. It's a tough pill to swallow, facing up to your mistakes, especially when they cost you almost everything. It's strange how life pans out. Here I was, living this happy, fulfilling life, while Jess, who had once been at the center of my world, was now just a distant, fading figure in my past. It wasn't a story of triumph or revenge. It was just life, with its ups and downs, its lessons and its consequences. As I looked at my sleeping family, I realized how far I'd come. The pain and betrayal were now just chapters in my story, not the entire book. I had moved on, found love and happiness again. And Jess, well, I hoped that she would find her peace too, in whatever form that might be. Our lives had diverged onto such different paths. Mine filled with the laughter of a child and the love of a family, and hers, a quiet journey of self-reflection and redemption. It's funny how life works out, isn't it? One moment, you're down and out, and the next, you're on top of the world. And sometimes, just sometimes, you find that the hardest roads lead to the most beautiful destinations.